Joker Folie Deux is a beautifully shot, wonderfully acted movie with an interesting script. Okay, there are a lot of problems here and we're going to try and drill down into them because I feel like a lot of people are just saying, oh, the music scenes are dull, oh, this film hates its audience, and I don't know, I think we can go deeper into what's wrong than just that. This video will pretty much be spoiler free until we get to a warning near the end, but also I want to say, and this did shock even me, I still kind of liked this movie. I am a therapist, perhaps it's because I can't help looking at it through that lens, but I still think there's something quite interesting and moving in here that a lot of people are overlooking. Perhaps Todd Phillips' biggest mistake here is that the film does have a very clear message, and it's a very laboured one, so overtly shoved down your throat that it becomes really hard to notice what else this film is about. To kind of go, okay, that's one point, you've made that message clear, but what else is going on here? Because I think there is a lot going on. And whilst the execution is at times horrendous, I think we could be having a much more interesting discussion about Folie Deux. So I'm going to try and do that, and hopefully you can all add to this or counteract me in the comments. If I sound ill, that's because I am, but otherwise, let's just go. Also, before we start, I just wanted to let you know that I have now started a second YouTube channel. Or rather, we have, because it's with my girlfriend, or now fiancée, Kirsty. It's called Thoughtless Tree because it's a more relaxed, simple channel. We'll be talking all about the movies we see each weekend at the cinema. We go every weekend and see about 3 or 4 movies.
And you got so scared you shook your drink out of your hand.
I got jump scared. I didn't get so scared. We'll talk films in general. We also probably will talk about our bunnies and just some fun things. We recently made a tier list about characters from Baldur's Gate 3. You know, second channels aren't of interest to everyone, but they're a space for me and Kirsty to kind of add the extra stuff that the algorithm wouldn't like in my main channel, I think. If that does sound interesting to you and you want to take a look, they'll be linked in the description and as a pinned comment, but otherwise, I assume you're familiar with the first film, the 2019 Joker about a man named Arthur Fleck struggling in horrible conditions in a social system that's not just forgotten him, but barely knows who he is to begin with. Him slowly becoming Joker. It's a very solid film, beautifully shot, gripping narrative with clear, tragic progression. It works, and I made a video on it way back, which, to be honest, isn't a video I'm the most proud of. I think I could do that one better, but Folie Deux takes up the story from then on. He finished that film in a high-security wing of a mental hospital, and that's where this picks up, awaiting a trial to decide whether he gets the death penalty or whether his defence can argue that Arthur has split personality disorder, and therefore is entitled to treatment instead of death. Which sounds kind of strange when you think about it. It's kind of surprising that for so many courtroom scenes, this film isn't making more of a critique of the legal system, because I think it probably could do that. Also, as the trailer makes clear, Arthur meets Harley Quinn in this film, and they fall in love, and everything drifts away from reality into this fantastical, magical musical. This film is a musical, but it's also a courtroom drama, and also kind of a prison film about Arthur Fleck. And right away, I think we have a massive problem here, which is that Arthur can't really do much. He is stuck in a high security wing. When it comes to love with Harley, or Lee I should say, she is very active and she leads him forwards in it, sets out their plans. When it comes to court, his lawyer does all the speaking for him, although if you've seen the film you know what happens there. His daily life is driven by the guards, can't really go anywhere, there's not many great events happening in the prison itself. What you end up with is a character who can have very little active impact on his own story, and that makes sense for who his character is, but also it's very hard to make an engaging narrative that way, watching your main character just be unable to do things. It's genuinely very hard to think of any times in this movie where Arthur really has an impact on the story, and that is such a contrast to the first film where he impacts absolutely everything. But there's a second part to this problem as well, and it's how very tied to Arthur our perspective is for this movie. Because if Arthur isn't really impacting the story much, surely at least other characters can, right? He sparks this massive movement, so surely big things are going to be happening within Gotham. Thomas Wayne was the mayor in the last movie. What happens about that now? What is Gotham doing as a whole? Or what is Lee doing? She is a more active character, but also she doesn't change that much. And whilst I think Lady Gaga's performance works, there isn't much character to her, much depth. Most of the time she just feels like a cheerleader, encouraging Arthur along in her plans. And I kind of want to stop and say, hang on, what about her? How did she get to this position in her life? Why is she really doing this? Where's her inner conflict? We see what she means to Arthur or to Joker, but what does she mean in her own life? What's her own perspective? I don't know. For someone who's there for half of this movie, she always just feels like a bit part to Joker. And I think that's probably the biggest letdown in this film. This movie is partly meant to be a love story between them. The title is Folie, Deux, which is a psychological term for two people essentially engaging and encouraging a shared fantasy. But Lee's character just isn't developed enough for you to really care about their relationship, or for the idea of Folie, Deux itself to be explored in any real depth. That's a big problem. That's the title of the film. So Arthur has no real impact, but also our perspective is tied so specifically to him that other characters aren't able to make much impact either. The biggest danger and tension in this movie is whether or not Arthur gets the death penalty, but for one, he doesn't appear to care that much, and two, it doesn't matter by the end of the film anyway. So what is there to keep us gripped? You know, just from a purely narrative point of view, where is the hook? And okay, I guess there is another conflict going on. We have to question this entire film about whether Arthur has split personality disorder or not. Did he, Arthur, kill all those people in the first film, or was it Joker as this separate identity? Is there a split between the two? And I think we've all seen the first film, and that's not a film that suggests he has split personality disorder, so we kind of already know the answer to that question. The question that's supposed to be a big conflict here. That's then not the most intriguing, is it? Watching people try to answer a question we can already answer ourselves. As a result of all of this, I think Arthur's arc is a bit flat. A lack of agency and a lack of conflict. How can he then grow? How can he develop? For a lot of this movie, he just feels stuck cycling over the same ground of the first movie, and in that sense, what is the point of this? Which is a question a lot of people have been asking. It's a very good question. What is the point of this movie? Besides, the first one made far more money than was expected, so of course they wanted a sequel, of course they want money. Aside from that, the obvious answer is that very unsubtle, laboured message that this film does keep on pushing and pushing, which is to explore the ways the audience see Joker. You know, within the first film, Joker became this accidental symbol for an entire movement. Everybody who feels like an outcast or forgotten or trodden down by society and are really angry at the world for that. Joker becomes an outlet. He became that symbol and they adored him as a hero, and a lot of the public are doing the exact same in this film. It's why the trial is such a big deal, and yeah, there is obviously something a bit meta here. It's a critique on how the Joker as a character can be glorified by the audience. That comic book semi-mythic symbol of chaos. It is a powerful symbol that, even like, regardless of glorification, is meaningful. And also these movies are supposed to be an origin story for Joker, right? Maybe not so much now with this one, but originally we all went into the first film expecting that. Regardless of the morals, there is then a part of us as an audience waiting and expecting to see Arthur become the Joker. That is what we want. So in that sense, is it that clever to then be making a sequel criticising the audience for wanting and expecting that? No, I don't think it is. I think it already did that within the first film anyway, and it was quite clever there because that critique was happening while the story was still developing. In that movie, there was a conflict where you're half rooting for Arthur because you empathise, and you're also half appalled and absolutely not rooting for him. I think that makes the critique quite fine. Todd Phillips already made this point, so to do it again, but this time the characters just standing around discussing the events of the last film rather than really developing new events, it's a bit weird and forced and so unnecessary. And to be clear, that's not to say I think there's anything wrong about criticising your audience. A lot of people are very bitter about this and complaining that Todd Phillips is insulting the fans, that this movie is sticking up a big middle finger to them, and to that I think, so what? I think movies should challenge our expectations. I think that's part of what's engaging. I think without that, films are more likely to just lean into becoming simple wish fulfillment, and that's very shallow and boring, and that's when you get all of these same sequels that mean nothing. The problem in my mind isn't that it's insulting, it's that it's not a very clever or meaningful or even new insult. Especially again when there is so little depth to any of these other characters. All of the public here are just this mindless mask-wearing mob. You know, where's the nuance to that? Where's anyone besides a very slimy Harvey Dent who thinks the opposite of this crowd? Or anyone who has a third opinion or a fourth opinion they can add into the discussion? If this film was supposed to be exploring the ways we think about Joker, then it's a very weak exploration because it only really explores one specific viewpoint. So yeah, I personally don't think Todd Phillips hates us as an audience, and I'm not at all bitter towards him. I just think he's not quite as clever here as he thought he was. But all of that said, I do still think there is something quite interesting going on somewhere here. Because this is kind of what the whole question of split personality boils down to in this film. It's, can Arthur become the Joker? Can that side of him take over? The film opens with a little vignette, let's say, trying not to spoil it, that is all about that idea. These two sides of him, can one come out on top? So yeah, can Arthur become the semi-mythic figure that we've all been expecting him to, or will he be unable? Is he, I don't know, not intelligent enough? Not mad enough? I'd say, is he too human for that? That's the bit I find interesting. I couldn't care less about all of these meta arguments. It's the conflict about Arthur either reinventing himself as something not quite real, to be seen as superhuman, or rather supervillain, or instead to be human, to be true, to be seen and heard and maybe even felt. I think there is some potential in that idea. Let's explore it further. I should point out, by the way, this film is unrelentingly bleak. So tragic and depressing, without much hope anywhere at all. And that isn't really my thing, to be honest. The first film was already tragic, but this time Arthur is so much more subdued and trapped, and the entire world feels so suffocating. But in a lot of ways I look at the bare bones of this plot, and it does feel like a natural progression for his story, because in the first movie, Arthur became the Joker by accident in a lot of ways. You know, he wasn't intending to spark a movement, nor did he have any hugely political things to say. There was no incredible supervillainy. He felt trodden on by the world, and Murray especially was an obvious target for his rage. But what he wanted was just to be noticed, really. To be seen, to feel affection. So when a lot of people did happen to respond to the Joker with riots and mass crowds, he feels heard and seen, and it's wonderful. It's empowering, it's a hit to his ego, and so seamlessly the idea of him standing on a car before a rioting crowd just blurs into the idea of him on a stage before a live audience, dancing and singing, because that's the bit that's meaningful to him. Not so much the politics or even the idea of chaos and destruction, but being seen, being loved, and if you can't be loved, then being adored and idolised like a celebrity. But he wasn't seen as Arthur, he had to be Joker. And then we get to the second film, and again, I really don't think Arthur has split personality disorder. I'm actually not going to try and diagnose him, but I will raise the concept of the false self, which is a term by the psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott. Essentially, all of us have a false self. The side of us that does hide some of our feelings for the sake of society, or politeness, or because we have concern for other people's feelings. You know, there are certain situations where rather than explode with all your feelings, you mask certain things. Like, you wouldn't just vent all of your anger onto a young, vulnerable child, or you would try to hide some of your nerves in a job interview. In some situations, this false self is an important function. Sometimes it's also an important defense. Obviously not all of the time, but in order for it to develop healthily, you have to have first expressed your true self when you were young, Winnicott says. To just be as you are, you know? When a child is upset, it just cries, regardless of if it's on a busy train, or if it embarrasses your mum, or if people are staring at you. When it's angry, it does just throw things, or screams. And when it's loving and sweet, it just expresses that naturally, because that's how it feels, not because it's trying to gain anything as such. And obviously you do set boundaries in place for bad behaviour, but in terms of the emotions, you do let the kid be as it is and express whatever feelings it has, whether they are good goods or bads or both at the same time. The kid learns it's okay to express all of its feelings, and it integrates that experience of getting to be authentic, let's say, getting to be honest, getting to be real. And it's precisely because it then has that experience now stored neatly in its heart, the idea of then later having to put on a bit of a false self at times is less stressful, less overwhelming, more easily managed because you feel more in touch with the true self deep down. Not that we should be seeing it like this clear concept you have of who you are, but you kind of just feel. But say you had a child, someone like Arthur, who wasn't really allowed to be as they are. Say you had a parent that reacted with rage or violence whenever you cried, or that they neglected your expression. And then say this mother tells you that you were brought into the world to spread joy and laughter, and that you have to smile, have to be happy. No space for other emotions, this is your function and your purpose. Be happy. You have to cheer me up too, Arthur. Suddenly, Arthur never gets to develop and integrate the true self as well as he needs to, because even from an early age, it's all about responding to his mother, making sure he expresses the right things around her, watching what he says and does. And it makes the false self far more powerful and then far more confusing to try and understand his identity. Who am I? Because suddenly it is now viewed like two very distinct things. Less like the false self has an ordinary function to support you than that this is a person who, on the one hand, is meant to spread joy and laughter, and then this other person, on the other hand, that is all of this pain and rage and fear bottled up. And when he is finally able to express it, it's so much rage and so violent that it's frightening to see. It's all-consuming. And I think if you've seen the vignette at the start of Folie, Deux, I think that scene expresses everything I've just said beautifully. In many ways, I think the film summarises everything it needs to say in the first few minutes, because all of this continues to be relevant. The film then begins with the prison guards repeatedly asking Arthur if he has a joke for them today. Every day they ask him for a joke, and if he tells them one, as he always has every single day, they give him a cigarette as a reward. You know, they don't find his jokes objectively that funny, but they see Arthur like this dancing bear to prod for entertainment because it makes their working day that little less dull. And so again, Arthur is falling into this same dynamic of having to spread joy and laughter, even when he is in a terrible, dehumanizing environment, malnourished, beaten, uncared for, given only pills as an answer to his problems. Even then he has to be telling jokes, has to be cheering them up. Except when we pick up the story, he can't do that anymore. He's feeling too depressed. He doesn't want to really say anything at all, and it's quite heartbreaking to see. The opening shot of Arthur where he walks out topless and is just all bones, looking so empty in his eyes, it's quite shocking. So there's all of that, and then we get to his lawyer who sees Arthur as someone sick and in need of help, and she is fighting a hard battle to prove that Arthur has split personality disorder and that he deserves treatment at a proper mental health facility as a result. But he doesn't have split personality disorder, and Arthur kinda knows that. He's supposed to talk like he does, say he blacked out, act like he's a completely different person from his crimes, but he's not. These are things he's been told to say, and you can tell he doesn't quite believe them, and it all feels so hollow saying it all. This is what the legal system requires of him if he wants any hope to avoid the death penalty. Again, expressing something inauthentic. When he wants to express himself, right? What's the point of all of this media attention, this court designed to talk about him? All these cameras and interviews and the crowd outside, what is the point if he cannot express himself? And so, again, Joker is his only outlet. It's certainly the one people want to listen to. 3 times in this movie. A psychologist has a session with him and asks to talk to Joker. Steve Coogan, playing a journalist, has an interview with him and asks to talk to Joker. Harley Quinn wants to be with Joker. Nobody wants to be with Arthur. And at first, that is empowering and does hit his ego and make him feel heard to be Joker, but it becomes shallower and shallower because, yeah, whilst he does get to express rage and pain as Joker, and he does get to feel the more confident, if not charismatic, version of himself that he always wished to be, he still can't quite do it because it's not him, or at least not all of him. And I think all of that is both what's most tragic about this film, as well as what makes it the most narratively dull. It's that Arthur never gets to properly express how he feels. No one gives him the space to do that because nobody wants to listen. The entire film, Arthur is suffocated by a society not interested in seeing him or understanding, and that is just... I made a video a while back about a girl named Mary Bell, and it's a true story of an 11-year-old girl in the 60s who murdered 2 people. And there was a whole media frenzy around her that became caught up in either seeing her as a total monster who is evil and we shouldn't listen to a word she says, or as someone who is entirely innocent and needs protecting and we should excuse everything. But neither of those extremes are true, and nowhere is anybody listening to her specifically. Everybody is deciding for themselves why she did it and what it says about society and where the problems are, and Mary is just this silent, confused person in the middle of it all. And that's what the court scenes in this film remind me of. In court, Arthur looks so out of place. He doesn't quite understand what the lawyers or the judges are saying. He's bored, he's looking around for Lee in the audience, he's doodling. Everything is going over his head and he's laughing at inappropriate moments, not out of callous disregard, which is what everyone else thinks he's doing, but because he's just not on the same page. There is something quite childish about him in these moments, and it's sad to watch Arthur being judged by societal norms that he just can't live up to. I find that idea really moving because it does happen. Nobody tries to fully understand Arthur the human, not all of him. They understand only the specific concept they apply to him, the sick person, the dancing bear, the monster, the folk hero. But Arthur is an entirely unique individual. Yeah, the film gets a bit too carried away with the meta aspects of that, and in terms of the narrative progression, it doesn't provide much, but it is still an interesting, tragic idea, I think. That Arthur went through everything he did in the last film, went to so many horrible extremes to make himself heard, and he felt like he was at the end of that film, except now we realise he isn't, and everything he did was for nothing. That moment on top of the car in the first film felt like a hero's triumph to Arthur, but now it's flipped into this awful reality where he's made even less understood. He did manage to get himself seen, and yet he's totally invisible at the same time. And then all you're left with are these murders you committed that changed nothing in your life, achieved nothing. They were just horrible. We need to understand these people. Just as I argued in my video about Mary Bell, obviously the situation's very different, but we can't just chalk them off as one thing or another because these kind of crimes do happen and will keep happening until we can better understand what drives the people behind them. And yeah, that doesn't mean excusing them at all, which is kind of the weird irony about Arthur's lawyer here, because the way to get him the kind of help he always needed is to legally argue that he was technically innocent of his crimes. I suppose you could say that. And arguing that would lead Arthur further away from taking accountability and allowing himself to feel the kind of guilt that he's kept walled off. But it's not about excusing anything, it's about empathy to understand why and how, and society rarely wants to do that. You know, the first film says societal problems can cause people to fall down dark paths. It says it a little simplistically, but it's still a powerful point. And then this film says, what's our reaction to that? What do we then do about it as a society? How do we respond when that happens? And the quite cynical answer of this film is that we don't respond really. We change nothing, learn nothing, which does make for a dull film without progression on the one hand, but on the other it means this film just sticks in my brain. It's a real tragic point, and I was just walking out of the cinema brooding on this. It made me want to go on a long walk just to have a long think about this, only we had tickets to see another film right after, which was Lee, and that was a brilliant film by the way, I highly recommend that. But it just stuck with me, and with all of that in mind, what the hell can I possibly say of Joker Folie as a whole? I think this is the most bonkers film I've ever seen, because there are times where it doesn't feel like a movie, where it feels less like a sequel than like some fever dream idea of a sequel, or like you've gotten hold of some banned, half-finished reel of film where it's interesting to watch, but you also feel like you're not supposed to, like it's not real canon. It's so outside of what you expect in a sequel that you almost can't take it seriously. I hope that description makes some kind of sense. I think the acting is great. Joaquin Phoenix continues to be phenomenal despite having so little space to actually do anything. I think the cinematography is wonderful. I think the music, sometimes works. Songs like There's Always a Joker are engaging and make sense and feel like Arthur grappling with the events around him. Other songs do feel very repetitive and change nothing in the plot and kind of give you tonal whiplash. I have to be honest though, I actually really like the idea of a musical. I'm not really a fan of musicals, but I think it makes perfect sense for us to see Arthur descending into fantasy via musical numbers. I think that's a really cool idea. The problem in my mind is that they don't go far enough with that. They're never as mad and as fantastical as they need to be. I think we need to feel Arthur really unravelling through the music, and we don't. Which in my mind isn't just the fault of the music itself, I think it's also the fault of the entire trajectory of this film, which I'm afraid I can only discuss by revealing a few spoilers. So that's your warning for the rest of this video, spoilers. In the middle of the film, Arthur fires his lawyer and decides to represent himself in court, which is a mad, tragic, hapless thing to do, but it means leaning into being the Joker more, and his fans cheer him for that. To be honest, I think a lot of the court scenes in this don't feel like real court scenes. I don't know if that's a deliberate choice or not, but either way, it does make for my favourite scene in this film, which is where Arthur is trying to be a lawyer, and he's doing some odd Southern American accent that I imagine he must have seen a lawyer on TV do, but it's all a mess. It's too tragic to be funny and too cringy to be sad, and it's just this uncomfortable, embarrassing mess of a scene which I absolutely love. But also, firing his lawyer is the one real moment where Arthur does have some impact, and I feel like it's a clear beat in his arc. You know, when we start this film off, Arthur is depressed and numb and unable to spread joy and be the faux stand-up comedian for the guards that he always wanted to be. Makes perfect sense, that beat. The influence of Lee, and as a general defence against the horrors of the prison system and his shame, lead Arthur further into delusion and into the Joker, culminating in his decision to represent himself in court. Makes sense. We've got a trajectory building here, you see. We're building to a climax of Arthur getting more and more lost in fantasy and delusion, but then Arthur does a very sudden U-turn. In court, he confesses that he can't do it anymore. He can't be the Joker. He isn't the Joker. And he gets halfway through a speech about it. This one chance he has to actually properly express his feelings in the entire film before an explosion happens to blast the wall behind him, and then some random people dressed as a clown want to lead him away to freedom. But that bit's beside the point. The point is, why did this U-turn happen? Why did he suddenly let go of the Joker? I don't know. It could be I missed it, you know, if this was on streaming or DVD at the moment, I'd probably just give it a quick look back, watch the scene again, and I might realise there is a reason. But either way, it still feels very abrupt and forced to just entirely let go of his defence like that. So not only is it sudden, but I think it kills the trajectory of this film. Slowly building up to this descent into fantasy that could have been a very tragic climax, seeing him get completely lost in that. Except it suddenly decides it's not going there. Structurally, it just makes the end of this film feel a bit underwhelming. And plus, it means all of the scenes where Arthur is descending into fantasy can never go as deep and as vibrant as they should, because we still need to see him come back from it. And you know, that means the songs are never that out there. They all just stick to the basic stage show aesthetic, where I think this film needs to turn into The Wall or something. I think it needs to get completely lost. I think if you're going to turn this into a mad musical, then commit 100%, you know? But it doesn't, and it means the music never feels like a tragic unravelling so much as just a thing that happens. And a lot of the scenes in general are just dully picking through the bones of the first film, and also the ending, I won't spoil the ending. I didn't hate the ending the way a lot of people do, admittedly, but it's not exactly a good ending. I think there is a point to this movie beyond just money. I think there is more of a point to Todd Phillips making this than just having a go at the audience, as people are saying. I think a lot of what happens does make sense for the character. It's what I can imagine. I find it dark and tragic, and it does gnaw at my brain. I can't help liking what is unquestionably a car crash of a movie. I'm sorry, I know it's mad, but I have to give this 6 out of 10. There are things in here that you feel could have worked very well, and I want cinema that's different. Folie à Deux was not what I had in mind when I was hoping for different, but it is still different, and I would much rather encourage DC and Marvel to actually try things than I would poke them with sticks the second they dare to rear their heads out of the safe, familiar den they've been hiding in the past decade. And all said and done, I do thoroughly recommend you watch this yourself. Not because you'll like it, you probably won't, but because it's so odd you kind of have to see it for yourself. Otherwise, let me know what you think. Disagree with me, like the video, subscribe, maybe even support me on Patreon or buy me a coffee. Maybe check out Thoughtless Tree, but otherwise, hopefully see you next time. And as ever, a special thank you goes to Flying Spider, Grace, Kellyanne Davidson, Luke Orr, Michael Gallagher, Chad Bramwell and Joshua C. Follier. Thank you.